Well, thank you very much, Bodi Tunya. We are coming to you live from Parliament Buildings on this 12th of June 2014, where the 2014-2015 budget is expected to be read out by the Cabinet Secretary of the National Treasury, Henry Rotich, later at 3 p.m. Key highlights so far indicated in the estimates released earlier in the month of April is that the national budget is expected to be 1.77 trillion shillings. Of that recurrent expenditure, we will take the lion's share of that amount given out at about 1.1 trillion shillings, while development expenditure is earmarked for about 471 billion shillings. Issues such as judiciary and parliament will get 18.5 billion, while parliament itself will get about 26.4 billion shillings. But I am not here alone. I am joined by His Excellency Honorable John Mbadi, a long-serving member of parliament here at Parliament. And just perhaps, Mbadi, if you're just to... You've already seen the estimates so far.
First of all, today we are expecting the Cabinet Secretary basically to come and tell us the policies and budget revenue-raising measures. But we have looked at the budget estimates. My concern is on the funding. How will we be able to fund close to 1.8 trillion budget? That is the question that we are asking. If you look at the projected funding levels, you realize that the government is anticipating or projecting or estimating to collect 1.18 trillion from ordinary revenue. Then it would expect to spend to get about 135 billion from external loans and grants, and then there's 36 million from commercial loan, and then 190 billion from domestic borrowing. Now, that to me scares me a lot, because apart from projecting to spend 190 billion up from 133 billion from domestic markets, we are likely also not to collect the projected revenue, bearing in mind that we have had issues in this country which are likely to have implications on the economic state of the country. Remember, we had the terrorist attacks, and with that came with the travel advisories, which have hit the tourism sector. And you know, much as I do, the tourism sector is very critical in the economy of this country. Therefore, we are likely to miss the target of 1.18 trillion. Then what then would happen? More borrowing in the domestic market, with the attendant risk of raising the interest rate and making life very difficult for Kenyans.
But you already know that Treasury is working on this plan to have a Eurobond. And even Henry Rotich himself is actually cutting short a trip that he was in Europe, selling the idea of having this bond sold in the European market. But looking at it and the kind of deficit that has already been projected at 342 billion shillings, is this something that keeps you up at night on how this is then going to be thrown to the hands of the more common wananchi?
Yeah, I think one thing that we need to understand with the Eurobond that is floated is last financial year, 2013-2014, which is coming to an end in a few weeks' time, we had projected that we would collect 135 billion through, or raise 135 billion through Eurobond. And so that has not been raised. And that is what Rotich is trying to sell out there, and possibly will get it. That amount, if we receive it, is supposed to settle or plug the budget deficit for the financial year that is just coming to an end. And so you cannot use that amount to project the future. That is 2014-2015. For 2014-2015, the only amount that we are planning to raise in form of Eurobond is 36 billion. Therefore, it will come to about 171 or 172 billion, but 135 of it is for the previous financial year, the year we are just, which is just ending. So not much is going to be raised for 2014-2015 with the help of Eurobond. Hence, my assertion that, well, it is in the budget estimate that we will raise 190 billion from domestic market. That is likely to go up, because if we don't collect the revenue that we are supposed to collect, given the fact that this country, the drivers are the agricultural sector, the tourism sector, and the manufacturing sector. The agricultural sector, there has been issues of rain in many parts of the country. If you go to Rift Valley, which is the breadbasket, has had a hit in terms of weather conditions. So agricultural sector is likely to suffer. And again, also the tourism sector. And therefore, you are left only Florida, all that. So chances are that we are not going to raise the 1.18.
Right, sorry for that. The microphone seemed to be failing us. But what Karanja was trying to put in perspective is where we're getting the money to fund this budget. But to paint a clearer picture of exactly what we're talking about, 2014-2015 is going to be 1.77 trillion. Now, that's just about 8% of what we had in the previous year. That was at 1.64%. So 1.64 trillion, that is 2013-2014. Now, you may wonder, why are we at 1.77? What has increased? Now, very quickly, the expenditure that we're giving to the executive, that is the office of the president and the trappings of power thereof, goes up by 11.9%. Parliamentary Service Commission, this regards to the operations of Parliament. The Parliament is a bit bigger. Transitional authorities, all this that we're paying for these transitional processes, we have an increase of about 39.5%. There's an increase in allocation to the judiciary that pushes it up by just about 16.1%, as well as the transfer to counties. Again, transiting to county government, and that is going to push things up by just about 6.1% now. This is what brings it to 1.77 trillion. And again, we'll later on have a clearer picture and breakdown of exactly where this money is going to come from. But you must have heard of the much talked about Eurobond that the Mheshimiwa earlier on was mentioning, and that is just part of what is meant to meet this budget. Also, we do expect an increase in taxes, and commonly, as tradition has been, we put a tax on what is now commonly known as sin tax. We're talking about products of alcohol and tobacco, where we increase a bit of the tax to be able to show up this. And here's a piece by Asha Mwilu on exactly the expectations of Treasury to put a premium on sin tax. Take a look.
Apart from having to justify why this financial year will have the biggest budget in the country's history, 1.77 trillion shillings, on Thursday, the Finance Cabinet Secretary Henry Rotich will also have to explain to Kenyans where this money is coming from. Already, Kenyans are concerned that, as usual, the taxpayer will bear the biggest burden. And the first group to be smoked out may well be the usual suspects, consumers of cigarette and alcohol in what is often called sin tax.
We saw what happened when the taxation on senator was increased. It led to the growth of illicit alcohol in the market. And in the last 1 month, we saw the negative effect that had. We lost about 100 Kenyan lives to illicit alcohol. So our plea to the government as Kenya Association of Manufacturers is not to target those industries.
While the increase of sin tax may have its downside, many Kenyans are more worried about the basic commodities. Tax experts have warned that the 1.8 trillion shilling budget will most likely force the government to push up the taxes.
Mtu nafanyia kama shilingi kama 500. Ukikuja sukari ni shilingi 100, unga ni shilingi 150. Ukikuja kwa mboga imeongezeka, mafuta imeongezeka. Sasa hakuna kitu unafanyia. Na ile kitu unafanyia kama ni 1000 inakwisha siku moja hivi ukiwa nafanya.
Wanatupandishia ushuru juu na pale tunauza vitu tunauza chini sana.
The leaders concerned not to focus mostly on basic goods, but they can explore more ways of collecting taxes apart from basic commodities.
Maminista wanatembea na magari 4, 5. Wananchi wa chini hata chakula ni shida, ule ugali ni sima ya chini, pia watu hawezi kuafford. Nchi imeharibika, nchi imekuwa mbaya. Uhuru ndugu yangu, nakwambia habari ya kupandisha ushuru hakuna. Fikiria watu wa chini.
What's left the government in another awkward spot is the Auditor General's report revealing that at least a third of the country's budget goes to waste. Treasury is now on the spot to seal those leakages before taxing Kenyans more than they can handle.
We are not succeeding in widening our tax net. We're going after the same taxpayers over and over and over again, and therefore we've sort of killed the goose that's laying the golden eggs for us.
The government should instead look at expanding the tax base, because there are many people who don't pay taxes in Kenya who should be paying taxes ideally. The government should also look at tax leakages. Where are we having tax leakages in our country? That should be addressed instead of having a sin tax.
With the countdown to budget day now on, the biggest headache for President Uhuru Kenyatta's government will be to rally the country behind its second budget as Kenyans wait anxiously for promises to be delivered. Asha Mwilu, KTN, Nairobi.
Right, and that was a report prepared earlier on by Asham Willie regarding the expected areas of, or if you like, low-hanging fruits that the government would be looking at in just shoring up and being able to meet this 1.77 trillion budget. But let me paint a clearer picture here. We're talking about 1.77 trillion. Now, bulk of this is coming from your taxes. The rest are coming from what we're calling appropriations in aid, which will be just about 51.3 billion. Now, if you add this to the taxes we are collecting, it means we have 1.397 in terms of revenue, yet our budget is 1.77. That means there's 342 billion shillings that is the deficit, and we need to find out exactly how we plug that. Before I tell you how we plug that, let's go back to Parliament where Michael Karanja is standing by.
All right, thank you for that, Bonnie. We are still here with Honorable John Mbadi. And just before you took that short break, you are raising some very pertinent issues, especially when it came to funding this budget. Your biggest concern is that other than just taxing the common mwananchi, we will still have to go back into the debt market, something that the government seems to be wanting to try to exit, especially locally. But given the size of this budget, it's unheralded. This is new territory that Kenya is heading into. 1.77 trillion shillings, almost 1.8 trillion shillings, is something that we're not used to. First of all, why this budget is that big? And secondly, how are we going to fund it?
One thing, I think the biggest mistake we are making as a country is to rely on incremental kind of budgeting, where every year we believe that a department or ministry has to get more than it got the previous year. Actually, as a matter of fact, a lot of times I see just applying a percentage onto what was given the previous year. Then that therefore means that every year we will be increasing our expenditure. And then we also rely on projected growth that sometimes are not realistic. Because like right now you see the projection that we have put about 5.8%. If you look at the happenings in the economy, it's not likely to be realized. And so I think as a country we need to come down and accept one reality, that the kind of expenditure that we are incurring on recurrent, we have to put a stop to it, because a lot of the increase comes through the recurrent expenditure, not even development expenditure. If you look at the percentage increase on development expenditures compared to recurrent expenditure, a lot of times you find the increase is usually heavy on the recurrent expenditure. What we need to do is to curb on that increase and continuous and yearly increase on recurrent expenditure, and then have more increase on the development expenditure, because development expenditure is productive expenditure and would again grow the economy. The other thing that I think we need to work on is absorption, because you'll realize that every year it is reported that recurrent expenditure, the minimum that we have absorbed is about 94%. So it's almost 100%. But when it comes to development expenditure, the maximum we have ever absorbed, I think, as a country was 60%. So it means that even though we budget less for development expenditure, then when it comes to absorption, implementation of the projects, it is still far much less. Two reasons contribute to this. Apart from the usually talked about and widely spoken about of the procurement procedure in the government, which I don't understand why the government has not taken the initiative to propose amendments to the law to streamline. The other issue is absorption of donor funds, which comes about as a result of two things. One is the accounting in terms of giving the records to the donors as required, and two, corruption. Because the donors, when they realize that you're not counting for their money properly, they will insist that before they give you extra cash, then you need to account for it. These are things that need to be sorted out so that as a country we are able to absorb almost fully, or at least 80% of the development budget, and reduce the recurrent budget.
So do you think Treasury uses this lack of absorption as that tool that it uses just to more or less play around with the money that on this incremental budget, not giving development expenditure the kind of emphasis that it needs?
Yeah, there is what I would call misinformation about the budgets for obvious reasons. You know, the law now requires that at least 30% of our budget, total budget quantum, must be development budget. So the government would want to show that they have respected that legal provision in the Public Finance Management Act by providing 30% of the development budget allocated to development. And then finally, it's not absorbed. So in real sense, we have not obeyed the spirit of the law. Secondly, what I also see happening is a lot of amounts that are indicated as development budget in actual sense is not development. The definition of development budget in Treasury is not the traditional accounting definition of what development budget should be. Because what they include is salaries of people working on donor-funded projects.
Mheshimiwa, I think I'll have to stop you there. But thank you very much for those insightful views that you've given us. But as you had, the Honorable Mr. MP John Mbadi has actually raised some pertinent issues, especially when it comes to the size of the budget, how we plan to fund it. But for now, we just take a short break and hand you back to Boni Tunya in studio for News Desk.
All right, many thanks, Michael Karanja, who will continue doing this interviews and analysis from the Parliament grounds, where we're expecting the Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury, Henry Rotich, to present the 2014-2015 fiscal year budget. You understand by now that this budget is 8% higher than what we had last year. We're talking about 1.77 trillion, up from 1.64. Who exactly will fund this? How will these new allocations be used? Who are the beneficiaries? And going forward, will this meet the targets that the Jubilee government is setting? All those answers will be answered on this particular bulletin as we kick off this year's budget coverage as at 2 o'clock. For now, we take a short break for KTN News Desk.